Wrong button, Scott. Wrong button. Okay, so it's been a fairly eventful fortnight, and I hope a good one. I think there's some promise that we might have, well, not might have solved, but we're a long way from solving, but we're on a pathway to solving some fairly fundamental issues that we had. And there's a very real possibility that on a few angles that we've certainly made some ground. I know it's probably sounded really quiet, and I just note that my communication on Slack has been non-existent. So I apologise for that, and I'll leave to my game. But I think just to talk you through what we talked about before in terms of what this is all about, and about reaching in and enabling people to get care that they require. Obviously, we've got some fundamental issues to resolve. So, not least of which is funding, and particularly funding of a platform that will get us off the ground to actually even facilitate a connection point between volunteers and people. We've had a number of discussions that I just want to bring everyone up to speed with. I had slightly different ambition for today originally, but I think there's just so much to download on you all and a bit to take away from this that we'll probably use our time just communicating status really as to where we're at. So one of the things that we said we'd do last meeting is we said we'd take a look at some data on mental health issues so that we could start to lobby varying departments around funding, etc., because that's certainly one pathway to funding that we have. So we've done some base analysis, and in fact we've done the base analysis that we will compare more recent data to, and I'll talk you through that. Effectively what we've been able to do is map across Victoria and New South Wales the hotspots as they occurred in 2017 and 18 when it came to hospital admissions for mental health issues. Now, there's a couple of issues with this data set from a nerdy point of view that I just want to talk to. And one of them is that the granularity of it's not quite where we want it. We want to get a bit tighter in terms of the geographic location of these incidents. But nonetheless, what it shows you is where there are high admissions in red and higher in orange and so forth on this grid. So on this map, sorry. So this is really a starting point for us to start to understand what mental health issues might have looked like then. And then of course, the goal is to compare that to more recent data. And I'll explain why we want more granularity around the data in a minute. But so we've got maps for, again, it's old data, but this will traditionally show you things like rural and regional and that sort of territory and what the issues are and where they are. This is Melbourne. And the hotspots, you'll see Port Phillip is a starring LGA in that game. And again, just by way of an example, this would be the base that we would compare to. And of course, we've done New South Wales and Sydney. So New South Wales, you'll see issues out to the west, orange, and further out west. And then in Sydney, again, it's quite central. A lot of the issues in the eastern suburbs and so forth, from if we use this as a proxy for there being mental health issues. So that's a basis. From that, Carl did his magic and we started having a look at using psychographic data to determine what the mindset of people are in those LGAs, where these issues occur. And that gave us some patterns. And these patterns demonstrate to us, I'll just give you one very simple explanation. We're not going to go through the whole methodology, obviously. But from the bottom left to the top right is really the diagonal of aspiration. And so when you see patterns where people have a shared top right and a shared bottom left, you tend to find people that have either come from lower socioeconomic environments or the people and have higher aspirations. And this is an important, if you think about it, this my very gruff example of this is if you think about it like snakes and ladders, if you've got high aspiration, but you understand what low aspiration is, your propensity to slide. That's the current hypothesis. Now, we're not confident that this data is actually at all accurate, and that's our concern. And our concern is the reason it's not as accurate as we would like is because we weren't able to get geographic data at a tight enough, or a small enough geographic region. But nonetheless, this just gives you guys an indication that once we've isolated a geography, we can build a story around those geographies at risk going forward. And we'll also be able to understand the determinable reasons that those risks occur in those areas. So that gives us a basis then, if we were to lobby for funding, to have some pretty robust data. So the guys who Carl and Hubert and I work with on the geodemographic stuff are doing their darndest to pull pretty tight data and pretty recent data around mental health issues, so that we can, when we go back up and have a look at these geographic catchments where there's traditionally an issue, we'll have a really tight comparison point for where there currently is an issue, and then of course we'll have that psychographic overlay to talk about perhaps the reasons why. So if we were to head down the pathway of trying to secure funding, we've got plenty of data to start a conversation, and one might posit plenty more data than other people might be getting funding with. So there's that as a basis of work. The other bit that's happened in the last couple of weeks is we've been considering a name change, and what I will say to that is that I just wanted to move away from Mindate as a name. It was definitely me driving it. This name has somewhat resonated across the group, but my belief is that before we landed on a naming convention that was relevant for the cohorts that we're trying to serve, that we need to understand the cohorts at a psychological level better and more accurately than we currently do. And once we do, then we'll know exactly how to brand position the proposition out to the communities or to the population at large. So I don't want to hang my hat on Worthy as a go-to-market name. It might in fact be the charity's, organization name or whatever. It's kind of inconsequential, but as a brand to go to market, my view is until we get the more recent data and we have a better fix on what kind of mindsets out there we're trying to appeal to, what kind of mindsets there are that we could determine are of greater risk of not reaching out, then we're not in a position where we could accurately land on a brand. Personally, I feel like we need something to talk to market about. We need some identity to talk to market about that isn't too far away from where we might land. And of course, the Worthy proposition is really around, you're worth it, which at a very primal level goes some way to sort of talking to at least the problem that we're trying to solve. So some other things have happened. So we've had a number of conversations with Core Plus, and we mentioned Core Plus in our last meeting, and Yanni's been really tremendous and generous with his time and his thinking around how we might go about this. And one of the fundamental things that's come up in the conversation was I was describing to him what a bummer it is that we can't get mental health practitioners to pay a fee to be part of this service. And in our many discussions, we've landed on a position that says that not all will, but enough will. And so the possibility here is that we have a funding model where mental health practitioners would pay a membership fee, would also additionally volunteer time, and they would do it under the auspices of procurement of customers or clients, and as a cheaper way to get to demand effectively. So Yanni's reasonably confident. What we have to do is model some of that. Now that left us with another opportunity, and the opportunity is this horribly drawn chart that I drew in 3 minutes this afternoon, which describes a model that Yanni and I have been talking about, which is, mate, if you build me the platform up front, I don't have any money. But what I will promise you is that we will share a greater slice of membership fees in the early days, and then that will cascade down over time, which in fact means that you get your money reasonably quickly on the basis of us acquiring volunteers. We get our platform up and we're in business, and we're not dependent upon anyone to approve a funding round in whatever government area that is. So look, the prospect of that's extraordinarily appealing. And so what we want to do is head down this pathway of modeling this out and seeing what it might look like. The other thing that's come out of that conversation is the reality that as well as being an initial triage service, we could play a role in, and the way to think about this is not really play a role in the facilitation or aggregation of Medicare funded sessions under mental health care plans. But in the facilitation or coordination of that, what we'd be ensuring is that the follow-up was occurring. And for us, that's a really important attribute that we could go to market with. And there's a lot that Kay and Yanni and I have had quite a couple of conversations about, to talk about the legalities of referral and rather the operations of referral, some of the fundamentals around privacy and considerations that we have around that. But nonetheless, we think it's a model that's worth having a crack at, and there's a few or more creases to iron out in order for that to be seamless. But what it would look like is that people come into Worthy with their free session. They would get a follow-up email or some correspondent email or text message from Worthy saying, hey, that was, it was great that you had that free session. If you'd like to follow up, click here. So they would opt in, which would trigger a letter to go to their nominated GP or a GP of their choosing in their area. That would not come from Worthy, but it would in fact come from the clinician directly, asking them to see that client with a view to getting them in a pathway of getting their mental health care plan and then coming back for subsequent sessions. So there's lots of considerations around that. I made that sound overly simplistic because it's not simple. And in fact, there's a lot of considerations around when people go to bulk billing medical centres. What do we do then? What do we do when someone doesn't have a nominated GP? How do we follow up the individual afterward and after we've done our piece in terms of referring on, and ensure that they did in fact take that mental health care plan up and they did in fact re-engage with that clinician? Because importantly, our objective is to make sure that people are getting the care they need, and so we need to have a loop around to make sure that all that happens. So again, very rough and ready schema of what we think is possible, but we've been working through that from a compliance perspective, and we have a reasonable awareness of some of the things that we have to now work through. So there's now some modelling to be done from a financial perspective, and equally some modelling to be done from an operations perspective to see how this process flow would work. Yanni's platform serves thousands of, the other benefit of course is that Call Plus serves thousands of clinicians, which gives us a base of acquisition for volunteers to begin with that's quite large and is not necessarily tied to any of the founding associations like APS and ACA and so forth. So that has some serious merit as well. So that's where we've got to in the last couple of weeks. Then, EJ, I'm glad you didn't fall off your chair there, about member-funded organisations versus what you've been working on. You must have a couple of thoughts, questions, discussion items.
You mean me or all of us generally having?
Anyone, anyone. Need me to explain any of it again or go back over it? That's cool. I probably went a bit quick.
I wasn't quite sure, Scott, about those grids of numbers, what the columns and rows represented.
It's a matrix that represents numerous God, I've just lost it. Numerous polarities between individualism, collectivism, risk, time. There's a whole bunch of
Okay.
mental perspectives within this particular grid.
Right.
What we're seeing though is a pattern of thinking that's occurring around those hotspots. And what we're saying is that we're not, because of the lack of granularity of the data that we analysed from 1718 that gave us these maps, we're not comfortable that these grids are yet representative of the people we'd be serving. We will explain that, but I'll just put this up for example to say there's another layer of analytics that goes on after the first piece.
Yep.
Which we could cover off separately. And I don't want to derail the rest of the meeting going through it. That's okay.
Right. And you and I have had a discussion, so I'm pretty clear on everything, but just wanted to say you've done some great work over the last couple of weeks.
It feels like we might, honestly, have a shot here.
Yeah.
And the fact that Yanni's, not only has he been really committed and working hard with us on how this might happen, he's kind of excited about the possibility of making it happen, and he's got the capability, he's got the know-how from a technical point of view, and this would be a complete digital experience. The other thing is that we might spend some time today having Mark talk about the chatbot as well. So I'm recording the session for a couple of guys that couldn't make it, who would be interested in understanding a little bit more about that from the horse's mouth. But once you start combining the willingness of not-for-profits to engage their own communities and refer them into us, and then the ability to drop technology into digital communities, then we've got a shot from the demands generation side of things as well, which is genuinely a reach-in.
Look, I should just also say I will have to drop off at 6 o'clock. So if I miss whatever I miss, I'll catch up with either you, Scott, or Kay, and just.
Well, if everyone's okay, I might throw to Mark and just Mark, I've got your PDF if you want. Was it? You see how unrehearsed that was, Mark? Just in the interest of time, Mark had absolutely no idea I was going to do that. Yeah, cool.
Coming late. It's your turn.
Look at that.
Oh,
yeah, coming late. Yeah, what's he talking about? Oh, I'm talking. Right. Okay. Everyone, this is Mark Cameron.
Yeah.
Go for it.
What am I doing? I'm just explaining.
To explain the process flow. So, I mean, I could do it, but I'd probably do a bit of a botch job compared to you.
Yeah, sure. So, look, I'll just get a bit of history, so context around this. So when we're dealing with, we're doing some work with the Australian College of Emergency Medicine and Ambulance Victoria during the start of the COVID process. They were saying they were concerned that there was going to be a lot of just a lot of people hitting the health system with potentially things that could be dealt with remotely. And they were keen to try and work out, how they could, what could we do working with Telstra and others to be able to help mitigate that risk. So one of the things we thought of initially was around the, so basically sort of just helping businesses manage their remote teams. So first of all, looking at reporting and sort of, the general COVID status, and then starting to move into the mental health and wellbeing side of things. What became pretty clear as we started to look at that, and this is what Scott and Simon and I started speaking around it was it couldn't really be a you've obviously got to have destinations, which is kind of like it's a pool, so there's places for people to go, but when people are working remotely, or when they're sort of depressed or stressed, there's having some way to check in on them and be able to ask how they're feeling, and take them through a process where they can then either go through a self-assessment or then be directed to those services that are available, such as the ones we're talking about now, would be really useful. Doing that at scale is really, really difficult. So doing that for an HR department doing it for a bank or a telco or whatever else. Pretty difficult. So we then started working with one of our partners and a bunch of other people, and started designing out an AI that could do that. So using conversational AI, it starts to learn how people are responding. It can start to almost understand the mood of an organization or a particular area of the, that it starts to the particular area of geographic area, but also understand language and nuance really quickly. And just we started thinking through what the process would be, and sort of taking Simon's advice. Have you got the last page of that? Because sorry, Scott. No.
This is the last page I've got.
Yep. Yeah, there was a workflow where we basically was sort of saying, like asking, "Are you okay?" but using several different kind of ways of asking that question, so it feels more conversational. And the fact that it's an AI, we can continue the conversation across multiple channels, and a continual conversation,
multiple time
so basically
periods.
One day they could ask them via text message, "Hey, how you feeling?" Person says, "Yeah, I'm okay, leave me alone." Next day it could be email, "Hey, yesterday you said you're feeling all good. Are you actually all right? You've been you've been alone for a while." And then they say, "Well, I'm not sure." And then so that would then take them through to a self-assessment process that was based on the DAS, or "I'm not okay," which would then trigger off a crisis intervention workflow, or I'm fine, I'm okay. So then basically put them into a low risk category, and maybe direct them towards some online tools around sort of general support and general well-being and so on. So basically, it's just trying to go, how do we engage at scale, and do some of that early stage triaging, to just be able to help them, direct them towards resources that might be relevant. But we can do that at scale, and we can actually build a system behind it that learns and produces real data that we can look at. Yeah, I saw the privacy and data protection. Don't worry there. Yeah, so we thought about the privacy aspect right from the core. So there would be no identifying. No identifying characteristics held by each person. So if they're responding, they'd be responding to an AI and to a workflow. The employer would never get any individual response, but they might get an aggregate response across their whole organization. So if they're saying, there is if that was something that was important, but basically saying, "Hey, look, there's a large number of people in your organization who are starting to stress, you might want to start thinking about some kind of way of managing that."
And for the lay people out there too, it doesn't have to be employers. Once the workflows have been designed, you can actually drop that into simple Facebook Messenger chats to people who are in communities, that sort of thing. It's fairly, and from an intervention point of view, Mark's worked with Simon on, a bit of a determination about, or a questionnaire about determining where someone's actually at, and based on that, I would think for our purposes, we'd want to see a collection of phone number so that we would be outbounding that person for an appointment, as opposed to leaving it to them to call, because after all, that is the issue we're trying to resolve. But I just wanted to show you that, because we've never talked about it. We've talked about it at a very distant sort of level, but now we seem to have a couple of threads coming together here that have us potentially doing the damage that we'd set out to do in the first place.
Yeah, EJ, you were just saying about the conversation to be recorded. Look, we've done this sort of quite a lot before. You can just have within a lot of chat box, you can have encrypted conversations, so they don't actually it's still using the same workflow, still using the same information. It's learning stuff, but not recording any personal information about that person. So it's not recording individual pieces of conversation, but it's recording kind of a signal.
Okay, thank you. All of that said, back to the floor, I suppose, about how people are feeling, thinking about where we're at the moment.
I'd just like to say also, just with that, so this conversational AI and the bits of technology that we pulled around it, it now looks like we're just starting to scale it inside Coles and a bunch of other organisations, but more focused on HR at the moment. But they're definitely starting to explore what the the psychological support and wellbeing support for their team looks like as well. So yeah, there's opportunities there now.
I think one of the aspects that comes to mind is that the project that Mark's working on with the conversational AI there, Worthy or MindAid, whatever we end up calling it, could be one of the feeders out from there that that bot could refer people to if they do need further, hand-holding or further, more intensive support. So this could be one of those channels that they refer to. That's kind of the way that I'm seeing that working.
But equally, we would also, in support of that technology and in support of the possibilities of it, and from a reaching perspective, when we're engaging not-for-profits about engaging the people that they're serving, we would also make it available or seek to make it available to their staff. Certainly the CEOs in the not-for-profits that I've been talking to are very, very concerned about the mental health and wellbeing of their staff, given that they're dealing with epic demands they've never seen before. So, and they're actually dealing with situations that are really upsetting, is the other thing. So, I know for a fact, like say Good Shepherd, they're on the phone to people who can't pay their rent or mortgage, and they're at the receiving end of some fairly distressing phone calls, those staff. And so those staff need supporting as well. So that was a big download.
In the situation where the bot realizes someone's suicidal, how we've talked about this emergency trigger, and at that point the person disconnects from the conversation. Is there a way of figuring out who it is and sending help?
Be careful answering EJ on this one, Mark.
It is not a trick question.
You got a tech guy and a security privacy expert. This could go really bad.
It's not a trick question. It's not a trick question. It is not a trick question. But my experience with these things before is that all the data does go somewhere, and de-identification is out there with the rainbow unicorns is all. But on the upside, if we can save a life, does it have that capability?
Oh, look, I mean, these are all business roles, so we can encrypt and destroy as much of the conversation as we need to, and we can trigger, like if we have crisis-based issues, then I would say that basically sort of beats privacy pretty quickly. It's really going to come down to where is it embedded, who, and what is the duty of care of the organisation it's taken responsibility for it. If we're putting it out there, because people have to license it and work on it. So if it's going through an organisation, that's what we were saying. Basically, if we're doing it through an organisation, it's for employees. They have a duty of care over those employees. So ensuring that that the conversation is not going to be made available to the employees. And then, but if there is an emergency point, then there is going to be a workflow set off, and I think that's probably good. I think it is. Saving a life is good, but at the same time, I can't not think when you mention that there are choices being made about data being deleted, and the company can choose, for example, Coles can choose to delete
anything that doesn't.
No, they can't do that.
No, they
What-
can't do
so
that.
who's
can't
choosing
do that.
to delete? Who's
Yeah,
making
so
that?
this is a cloud. This is a cloud. They would just have they just have access to an instance. It's cloud provided, so we're not going to install it on there. They're not going to have access to the back end of it.
So
That's
in this case, who is making the choice to delete or retain data?
The
If
rules
not
that are set. The rules that are set.
We'll just build it into the role. So anything that hasn't been set as anything that's basically been put aside as general conversation, then that won't be kept. Anything that's anything. And look, I mean, even if there is an emergency, it would trigger off a workflow, but it doesn't necessarily have to let the employer know. The employer doesn't need to know that there's somebody who's had an emergency. It's really just making sure that that emergency services and anybody else who can actually do something about it is aware.
Yeah, because it's a dangerous line there, the medical
Well, I mean the other point is
and an employer mix. It's a deadly mix. It's like alcohol and driving.
Oh, I agree completely. I mean, of course, there's we could just do nothing and then
No, and I'm not trying to say I'm not trying to be that kind of lawyer. I'll always try and find a solution, but I need to understand it.
Yeah.
Can you put parameters around, like, is there a duty of care around work then when you're not at work? Because there's on duty and off duty.
There's not much off duty
Well,
these days, is there?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, so WorkSafe Victoria had basically said that they've updated the legislation to say that employers have a legal obligation to track the COVID status of every single employee. And report that to the DHHS. There also is a legal requirement to where possible, take a proactive approach to the mental health of their employees, particularly in remote situations. So there is legislation out there that says that they at least have to put in some kind of system or some kind of way of managing that and checking in and trying to provide some kind of support. Now, I know of businesses right now who are ringing people up one by one and saying, "Hey, you okay?" And then if they get a yep, then they're hanging up and say, "I'll call you back next week," which doesn't seem very effective to me, but they're compliant. Whereas actually finding some way to tease out conversations, and actually seeing, there's been quite a lot of studies done in the US where I think where an AI was used to help manage soldiers' PTSD, and it worked really, really well because the soldiers eventually got to the point where they realized it wasn't a real person, so they started to open up to it. And that's the idea here, is just sort of saying, look, we've got to be really mindful of the privacy issues. We've got to be really mindful of the data issues. We've got to be really, really mindful of those things. But let's try and find a way through all of those things, because we can't design the finished product yet. Let's start somewhere and get going.
So just mindful of the time, from a next steps point of view, I want to say that from my perspective, and hopefully it's the shared view of the group, if Yanni and Core Plus can make this happen for us, then I'd actually not only like to endorse him as being our platform of choice, but which we did cover last time we caught up, but moreover would like to invite him to the team. And cool. We've discussed that with him too. So that's the next step. He's super keen to model out this reverse S-curve model or whatever, mostly because he'd never heard of it before, because I'd made it up. But we think it will work. we both agree it will work. We both agree in principle it makes sense, and now we have to actually model the numbers and see what that looks like in the context of his development costs and so on and so forth. But I think you'd all agree his role in helping us is like a shot of steroids really to the entire effort, to be honest. He helps us acquire volunteers. He helps us with systematize the whole bloody thing. He's got the platform to run it. And then, of course, we can now play a role in facilitating mental health care plans and running loops around. I mean, that's even better than we thought we could achieve, actually. So we'll move forward with him and start modeling some of that stuff out, and we'll include him really transparently in those models. We're not trying to make money or take money away from him in this process. We're just trying to get a job done. He's also got some other people out there that have added layers of application to his that seem somewhat useful, that we're entertaining, but we're entertaining those people as additional partners in the mix. So there's that. And I think really there's not much we can do. The other go forward is obviously the data analysis piece, so that we can better understand the cohort we're trying to serve. And we'd have to run a very separate session with everybody on that. But we're at least a couple of weeks away from that, if not more. But we still feel that that's important work to do. And it's important from the way that we engage with these communities and these people, that we understand who it is that we're talking to, particularly when we're trying to reach in and have conversations that are engaging. So they're probably the main things that we can go forward with. I think otherwise, EJ, we've probably got some discussion points around structure of the organisation, particularly if it can be member funded. It resolves a lot of the requirement to be a DGR charity, if we make that model happen, but it also takes on a different flavour from a registration perspective. So I'm aware of that. That we'll need to kick that on. But otherwise, I think they're the main things that we need to do from here. And I just want to thank everyone that's helped so much on this so far. It's been really awesome, and it feels like it feels like we've got a shot, which is really not. I wasn't that convinced of that a few weeks back, I have to say. So we'll see where we go from here. But
just very quickly on the membership organisation thing, people much more experienced than me have explained that only relying on that as income is very stilting to the growth of an organisation, and an early on sponsor or government grant is a lot easier, because let's say the membership's priced at whatever it is, like a $50 one-off, or whether it's a $50 a month or whatever it is, it's still limited and doesn't often match the outgoings. So not poo-pooing it, but just
no, and I think so. Here's my thoughts on that, just to talk openly with the group. I agree that we need alternative funding. This member-based model, though, takes away our biggest cost imposition, which is the platform. The data would actually enable us to go and seek other funding, and we can, I believe the term is auspice, a relationship with Life Be In It, to borrow their DGR status so that we don't have to pay $20,000 for a registration. So we can do that and fundraise utilising their DGR status in partnership. So I agree with you, but I think we still need to do both. And the member thing might be enough online, but what's really cool about it is that when the platform's up live and we've got a way of starting to recruit volunteers, boy, oh boy, you're in a really different position from a DGR fundraising perspective. And that's, I agree with you. I think both need to happen.
I think you're going to, I think the thing that the membership thing doesn't, there's privacy considerations, obviously, between the clinicians and our potential clients that we've talked about as well. But I think, mental health clinicians are notoriously, not what you might call free with their cash. So I agree with you, EJ. I think, we do have to look elsewhere for ongoing funding, but perhaps if we can get this up and running, that's going to be easier.
Yeah, agreed. And and Yanni did say that we weren't universally going to get support for that member-based funding piece, but
there's a lot of avenues we can go down if we get it up and running. A lot of avenues we can go down. So heaps of things we can do.
Cool. All right, it's 6:14. thank you all very much. Unless there's any other questions, I'm happy to leave this one there.
Oh, okay. Oh, thanks, CJ, for that. Yeah, great. All right.
Cool. I saw that. It's awesome. Nice.
Yeah, it's really good actually. We've got Ed Santo from the Human Rights Commission, David Watts, who's the former Privacy Commissioner. We've got Ariel Bogle, who's the cyber law reporter for the ABC, and Celeste Dreyfus, who co-wrote the book with Julian Assange, and it's being moderated by a techie Melbourne-based Aboriginal woman. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. But only if you got
cool.
time, it'll probably be
It
a
looks
book.
great. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks
it's
for that.
Cheers, AJ.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon. I'll promise I'll communicate better, more frequently. There's been a bit going on, so thank you again for taking the time tonight. It's really appreciated.
Cool.
Okay,
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.